insane updates in Asia, calling out heroes is ramping back up, and sadly, we do have a couple E.U.logies to get through. Hey folks, my name is Apostle, and this is Watching Overwatch, or WoW. As we all know, Overwatch Esports can be hard to follow, so this is the scuffed but quick way to get the rundown on what's happening in the scene. Real quick, I do want to give a huge thank you to the community for all the support I got in the first episode. All the feedback and the positive notes were very much appreciated. It really means a lot that people liked it so much, and I'll do my best to keep it going. Anyway, let's get things started with OWCS Asia this week, as the playoffs are nearly done, and the first thing we need to do is officially welcome Juno to the meta. Originally, we kind of questioned Zeta Division when they started running it, but guys, I'm not gonna lie, Changun and Rascal were cooking this whole time. Our quarterfinals saw Zeta Division take a clean sweep over Hajakdan, who unfortunately kind of went out with a whimper. For those who don't know, Hajakdan seemingly don't have a coach anymore after Smash and Undyne have both left, and I think it really showed here. They heavily favored the Lucio Kiriko comps that they were already familiar with, and even though it kind of worked at times, it was pretty clear that not playing the Juno was making them ultimately fall behind. And it ultimately ended in a C9 when they finally did start playing Juno in the final round, so not a great way to go out. But surprisingly, it was actually Fnatic who showed signs of life. Despite a 3-1 loss to Falcons, this series was a lot of Fielder just having a field day, as with Donghak not really being a D.Va player, there was really nothing to stop his bio nades, and of course Fielder was surgical with them as a result. Also, any meta where you can have Hanbin on D.Va is practically a cheat code, right? But despite the Ana masterclass, Fnatic actually did a phenomenal job of making this close, and they more than held their own. To put how close this was into words, about 5 HP on Hanbin's baby D.Va was the difference between a potential map 5 and the Falcons win we saw. So Fnatic, they're finding their footing a little too late in the season, but it was very well played nonetheless, and I would say this game was a must-watch. Now in the semifinals, we had Crazy Raccoons versus Falcons and Pokerface versus Zeta. Zeta recently had that 2-3 loss to Pokerface, but they looked like an entirely different team this match. It may just be Pokerface not feeling nearly as comfortable after that meta shakeup, as they were able to take a map and show that you can't write them off. Both teams seem to favor the hit scan a lot more here, as we did see a fair bit of Ashe getting played, and I would say Proud was keeping it fairly even with Flora, but it was Alpha Yi who was actually a step above his counterparts. The game ultimately ended in a 10 ultimate teamfight that made me feel like I was just watching into a kaleidoscope, but after the smoke cleared, Zeta were sitting strong and clearly feeling very comfortable in the meta. But the real news here is in the Crazy Raccoons versus Falcons game. As we've seen so many times before, even the most dominant teams can be beaten if you can get the meta read faster than them. And now, for the first time in 3 months, Crazy Raccoons have finally fallen again. There's no one single thing that made them lose, but 2 things are worth mentioning. One is Lip's carry ability has been effectively nerfed with hitscan not being nearly as dominant. While he may be the GOAT, he doesn't offer the same kind of flexibility that you get with the proper Stalker lineup. And flexibility leads me to number 2, which is Crazy Raccoons are still playing Junbin quite a bit despite having Max on the roster. I'm not saying Max would be a match for Hanbin, as Hanbin is flexible enough to play D.Va and anything else they need, it would seem, but you would think that he'd be playing a lot more with D.Va being as strong as she is. Now despite all this though, Crazy Raccoons didn't miss a step, and they took a quick 3-0 in the lower bracket against Pokerface. There's not much to talk about there, as all it means is that Pokerface got the wildcard spot, well, CR is still qualified, but it was a pretty entertaining match for just how much they were able to play with their food. But with that win, Falcons continues to be the only team to have ever beaten Crazy Raccoon, and they'll actually be moving on to the finals where they'll be facing Zeta Division, which should be a really interesting match actually. As well, Zeta might have an edge in the Juno department, Flora might not actually be flexible enough to match Falcons. If the teams want to run double flex DPS, Flora's not really a flex player, right? We'll have to see if they can cook something up to overcome this. Now, moving over to Japan, the meta shakeup has been just as impactful here. Beryl and Insomnia. They were the 2 grand finalists of Stage 1, and they looked ready to continue that dominance throughout Stage 2. But now in the 11th hour, they actually slipped up, and they each lost their semifinal matches. Beryl lost to Niam Gaming in a 3-1, and Insomnia did the same in a 3-2 to Lazuli. Niam Gaming actually did something really interesting. While both teams were playing the Juno, Beryl leaned into the new kind of double flex DPS comps, where we see Mei and Venture, that kind of stuff, whereas Niam kind of seemed to take the opposite approach. Rather than try to mirror, they focused on what they knew. Daisy was playing Ashe basically the entire time, and Scarlet would flip between Genji and Tracer. So despite their comps seeming worse on paper in this new meta, they seemed much more comfortable on it than Beryl, which I think is what ultimately gave them the win. Now Insomnia versus Lazuli though, this was a constant back and forth and a certified banger match. Insomnia actually leaned heavily into the ball comps, trying to enable that with the Juno, where Genji and Sombra were played to assist the dive. whereas Lazuli was favoring rush comps using a lot of Mei, Ram, and especially Junker Queen. pulling it out even on Circuit Royale at one point. We saw more and more comp variations as the maps went on, and Lazuli were able to find the win in the end, seeming to have just a little bit more flexibility. Something interesting that is worth pointing out is that Daisy, Leonopteryx, and Godsam were all on Insomnia in Stage 1 and were part of that success, but they've all now made it farther than their former team did. But Veryl, in a similar fashion to Crazy Raccoons, they went to their third place match with sheer determination and shut down Insomnia in a quick 3-0. So that brings us to the wildcard matches. How did that play out? Well, Full House from Pacific unfortunately ended up forfeiting their spot, and E.U.logy took their place. Honestly, that kind of sucks, because as a result, that means the wildcard was basically as straightforward as you can get. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. These were insanely one-sided matches. Veryl had a couple good moments against Poker Face, but like still not by much. I mean, they got control of the objective sometimes, but that's about it. They still didn't get a single point. And E.U.logy themselves didn't get a single point against Veryl, so you can imagine how their match against Poker Face went. There's really nothing to talk about other than Poker Face maybe setting a new record on Coliseo. They got a full cap in under 3 minutes, so I mean, there's that. But anyway, with us being robbed of Full House versus Veryl, which could have been a great match, Poker Face have now made it to the main event, along with the other teams that we can see here. I think the top of Pacific and Japan could have some great games against each other, but I'm not gonna lie, they have their work cut out for them if they want to look even competitive against the Korean teams. Anyway, that wraps up the important games that happened this week, so now let's talk tournaments, rosters, and everything else. First up is Calling All Heroes. For anyone unaware, this is a tournament specifically to support underrepresented genders, similar to Valorant Game Changers. I touched on this a bit last week with the YFP and Super Shy announcement, but we do actually have a bit more now. Minor 2 has officially started, so teams are going to be battling it out, not just for cash, more importantly, circuit points, same as OWCS. Now the first big news here is that Nightmare have entered the scene, which is kind of to be expected at this point, right? I mean, what scene aren't they in? But they've actually partnered with Timeless to sign the Ethereal roster with a few key changes. X10, Halo, and Scuffed have left, whereas Peace, Graham, and ZSS are in, as well as Senna, who's coming off the bench. Peace in particular is a very talented player who's been around forever, and they recently made top 16 with Team Z in OWCS. And ZSS was part of the FMCL roster that became Nightmare, so they should be more than capable of filling the shoes that were left behind. Another team that you'll want to keep an eye on is the Bubble Blowers, a team that recently popped up featuring a lot of players formerly of Valentine. Now this is important as Valentine were actually the #1 team by circuit points. They were actually ahead of both Timeless Ethereal and YFP. Now it does seem that they've quietly disbanded, but the players are certainly still as dedicated as ever. While Kindred has gone to YFP, AJMR, Kuna, and Mari are on Bubble Blowers, so hopefully we'll see the same success from them. Between them, Nightmare, and YFP Super Shy, these top 3 are looking super competitive, and any one of them could honestly come out on top. I'll also throw this news in here since it fits. Timeless actually have a second Calling All Heroes team, operating in partnership with Anomaly, which is the org that popped up from the Luminosity core. They'll be operating a Calling All Heroes Rising roster, and Rising is the sub-tournament for players that are Diamond and below. So while it might be a bit before we see them up on the big stage, it's still nice to see these orgs invest in teams that are about creating player growth. Speaking of teams though, we do have some sad news as I mentioned earlier, as 2 EU teams appear to have been put to rest this week. Firstly, Game & Gladiators have announced that they are releasing their Overwatch roster and seemingly will be exiting the Overwatch scene. Peps are no longer GG, and honestly we can only hope that they'll remain Peps at this point. But following severe underperformances after EWC, it's up in the air to be honest. These players are all very good, and when they perform at their peak, they look among the best in the world. But there's clearly been some factor at play behind the scenes or something that's just holding them back for some reason. Hopefully though, the players do stick around and can find good teams, as we'd all love to see them find farther success. Now the second team that we need to say goodbye to is Sheer Cold, who also appear to have quietly disbanded. Now Sheer Cold have been one of the older teams in the scene. They've been around since like 2020, and they've never been the best team in EU, but they were like a perfect member of the sidecast. Unfortunately, they've also struggled in the recent OWCS stages. They got top 8 in stage 1, but it dropped to top 16 in stage 2, and then in stage 3 they got 17th and barely missed that cutoff. Now they did lose a lot of the talent that they had in the first couple stages, and unfortunately it just seems like they couldn't really recover it. So it really is sad to see a long-time constant of the scene go out, but honestly there are few teams that can say they had the impact that Sheer Cold had. Now, as sad as that may be, the future is still bright, and as we all know, students are the future. There's not much to talk about quite yet, but Collegiate Overwatch will be starting very soon as school is back in session. For anyone unaware, Collegiate in Overwatch is growing now more than ever, as more and more schools are beginning to offer scholarships that can make Overwatch into actually a sustainable esport. Several of the top players in OWCS NA and EU players are actually playing in Collegiate at the same time as being on their other teams, so the competition is at a very high level. While the Overwatch Collegiate Championship is the premier tournament that's run by Blizzard, we've also just seen the announcement of the NACE Super Conference, which will be starting soon. 5 of these teams here were actually part of the top 8 in the Collegiate Championship earlier this year, and Maryville and Winthrop especially are scary names with some stacked rosters that you'll need to keep an eye out for. While they're not in the Super Conference, Northwood and BSC Bobcats have announced their rosters for the season as well, and these look genuinely good. Names like Lep, Icy, Manually, Proda, these teams have a lot of punch-up potential, so hopefully they can live up to it. Alright, now let's take a more general look at rosters and team moves. First, the team from China, LGD once again, they appear to be getting active again. After a heartbreaking loss at EWC, it's been mostly radio silence from them, but that's until now, as they've announced the signing of a new training manager. A new manager hopefully means we'll see them back in game soon. But on the other hand, they did also announce that they'll be releasing Lengsa, who's their longtime main support, following a potential scandal behind the scenes. I won't get into it too much here, but maybe releasing him was for the best. Either way though, the fact that they are making these roster changes means we should see them back in action soon. Nightmare is back in the news. They've announced the release of Citrus. Despite great performances recently, I think it only makes sense with how many teams are signing. You have to cut the fat somewhere, right? But these players should have zero problems finding a home with how much success they've been seeing. Finally, a legend returns as Kareev has announced that he's looking for team again. This is of course for a coaching position, which is what he's been doing following Owl collapsing. And while he has had very mixed results, no one can deny the amount of experience he has under his belt, so it's still cool to see him remaining in the scene. Anyway, let's look ahead at what we got coming up. Again, dates and times are in EST, so convert as needed. First up, we got the Faceit Leagues. We have received official confirmation that these will be streamed on Faceit_Overwatch. Obviously, not every match will be on the main broadcast, but hopefully we can get some close games there, and I think especially in NA we'll be able to see that. These will be starting on September 13th, but it'll only be the upper quarters and semis and lower round 1. The rest of the matches will continue on September 14 and 15, and I think those later ones are the ones you'll want to catch. Now, the Calling All Heroes playoffs will begin on September 14th at 2 p.m. I haven't seen any word yet on if these will be on the official channels, but players will almost certainly be co-streaming it. And also, don't quote me on this, but I imagine SK will likely have some kind of coverage as well, as I know she's very involved with the Calling All Heroes scene, so it might be worth checking there on the day of to see if there's anything. Otherwise, look through the Overwatch category, and I'm sure you'll see players streaming it. And finally, we got playoffs for Korea and Japan. These will be on September 15th, with Japan starting at midnight, 12 a.m., and Korea is going to be following at 4 a.m. While all these teams have qualified to the main event already, I think we can expect some really close matches on both sides, so it should be really, really good to watch. Anyway, that finishes things up here. Links to everything I've talked about can be found in the description below, so make sure you check it out if you want to dive even deeper. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up here, but if you can't keep track of it, I'll be here for you. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.